We're going to talk about some lessons to be learned from a recent crisis that just happened and occurred in the U.S. in Oroville, California, where the Oroville Dam, for the first time in 48 years since it's been built, water was pouring over the spillway. The waters have really accumulated above the dam because California's been in a drought for a good while, and now there's just a lot of rain, and two of the rivers that are coming into that lake have started to overflow the lake. And one of the big problems is on the spillway they had a major sinkhole and a huge crack that happened on the spillway, and water was pouring in every direction. It started pouring over the levee, and they actually called for a mandatory evacuation of 180,000 people that were in the downstream area. This was a pretty significant thing because one of the problems originally is they thought they had it underway. They thought they were going to be able to repair it. They were kind of saying some things about it. They were having some issues, but that everything was fine. Then these people received a mandatory evacuation. They had 1 hour to grab their things and to get out. And so what we're going to talk about is looking at some of these type situations that can just happen every day. Now, definitely if you live below a dam, those are some things you need to consider. But one of the things that happened to us, in fact, it was, I think last year, there was a train wreck with some chemicals on it about 20 minutes from here. And 1,500 people had to be evacuated from this area. But they had 15 minutes to get out. There are things that can happen in various places. What I like to call it is my personal SHTF. It's local. It's not nationwide. It's not worldwide. It's not an apocalyptic SHTF. It's just in my daily life, and being prepared for those things just for survival. Now, one of the great things, and I'll go ahead and preface this story, is it looks like the dam's going to be okay and there's still an evacuation in place, but things they hope are going to be fixed because there's rain coming in the next couple of days. And so hopefully these people are going to be able to get back into their homes. The thing to think about though here is if these people had to evacuate, and if that dam had broken and the water had flooded those areas, they would have lost everything that they have. But material possessions are not as important as your survival and the survival of your family. So we're going to look at some lessons learned and some things. I did quite a bit of research on this, trying to relate it to how we can be ready in case there's a crisis situation to where we have just minutes to prepare and to get out of Dodge. Now I want to talk a little bit about just the damage that happened at the Oroville Dam. One of the things that really started was there was this spillway that comes down, and here's a picture of the spillway with it intact and pre-damage. You can see how the water can just flow out, and they can release that water and be able to keep the dam from overflowing. What happened is here we have a large hole, a sinkhole. This hole supposedly was like 40 feet deep. It was about the size of a football field. So this is a pretty large kind of area. You can see these men that are inside it trying to repair it and the size that they are compared to the damage. And here it is with the water flowing, and you can see the force of this water. And then of course down below stream, water, some witnesses said, reached up to almost the treetops at one point. And so there was some flooding and some things that happened, but not a massive amount. One of the warnings that happened though from the authorities was that there could possibly be a 30-foot wall of water pouring down through where the river flows. And this would be almost like a tsunami. I mean, it would just come forcefully through. The evacuation area encompassed all the way to just 70 miles north of Sacramento, which is the state capital of California. So, this was a highly populated area on down below there. But again, 180,000 people were demanded or required to evacuate these areas. And there were a number of towns, about a dozen towns, that were evacuated. One of the big problems, again, was it was a 1-hour warning. But the big thing is that it was poorly communicated. A lot of people didn't even know about the mandatory evacuation. And so a lot of people were just going about their daily life during this time, and of course caught on quickly as people started loading up and getting ready. But one of the problems, as soon as that announcement went out, you're racing against a clock, not only for the 1 hour, but to get out of there so you don't get trapped in traffic. That was one of the big problems. In fact, one guy reported that he went 10 miles outside of the city center or the town center, and it took over 4 hours. One of the things that's really critical is getting ahead of that traffic if you can. So the longer you take grabbing things and packing and preparing, the more time you're going to be stuck on the road. There were some panicked people, but not a whole lot. But there were some that were flying around and being very reckless trying to get out of there. But one of the biggest issues was that a lot of people needed gas, and the gas stations were mobbed, and then they ran out of gas. So there were a lot of people that were leaving that were really riding low on fuel. And when you're in a bumper-to-bumper traffic situation, your fuel burns quickly. Really making sure that you have gas in your truck or your car or your vehicle at all times, at least a half a tank to get you where you're going. But it's really smart to have that gas put back. You're going to use it anyway, so just have it in your truck or your car is just smart. Another thing is all the stores closed up. I mean, immediately, people closed up their stores, they locked them down, and if you needed supplies or anything, you were just out of luck. Even grocery stores closed down. So, having supplies that you need to get you to either a friend or family member that's outside of the evacuation area or shelters. Now, that's one of the things, you may not have family or friends in a local area. They may be halfway across the country. They may be in a certain area it's just impossible to get to. So having some kind of evacuation plan or an idea. Now, Red Cross, of course, opened up a number of shelters, but the big problem is these shelters filled up quickly. People would come to the shelter, that shelter would be filled, they'd have to go to another shelter, and that shelter could have been filled. And of course, just the whole process of living in a shelter type situation is tough, and having the items that you need. Now, of course, a lot of the necessities, the Red Cross will come in and take care of it, and a lot of times they'll feed you, they'll give you a place to sleep or lay down. But I saw some photos where people were actually sleeping in a park with sleeping bags or makeshift, bedding. And that's not a really good idea. That's something that you probably want to think about ahead of time. When we put together a go bag or a bug out bag, you should also think about this kind of situation to where when you grab the bag and you go somewhere, you're going to be able to sleep fairly comfortably, or at least to stay warm. Also, having a little bit of food would have been great. They were serving food, but a lot of the gas stations and things were closed and out of gas, so snacks and treats and things like that would have been unavailable. Now, communication would be the utmost importance. Being able to even know that this evacuation had occurred, and as we talked about, there were a lot of people that were even unaware. Some people, in fact, one report was there was a man and his wife that were out on their property on a hike, and they didn't even know about the situation, came in and then just had a very limited time to get things together and to get out, and of course immediately faced all the issues that we're talking about with really heavy traffic. 180,000 people, especially with limited roads. When you get into rural areas, a lot of times there's limited roads and access out of an area and a lot of bottlenecks. Of course, one of the things too is law enforcement set up a lot of roadblocks to keep people out of certain areas that really were leading to nowhere. So having that ability to communicate, having the ability to communicate with your family, they may not be at home, they may be out and about. And so being able to know what's going on, having an emergency radio to me is the perfect time for that. Your cell phone, you can get a lot of things on it. Making sure you have your chargers for your car or a battery backup to be able to keep those phones charged for communication. In this situation, communication would be one of the utmost importance, and in really any survival situation. But being trapped somewhere, or you need to get in touch with authorities, that's really important. And two, a lot of times in rural areas, you're going to have limited cell coverage and things like that. So that's something also to consider when you're setting together a plan. Thinking about those things, if you have them all together, you don't have to rush around and try to pack. Yes, you've got your bag, you can grab it, throw it in the car. That gives you 15 more minutes or 20 more minutes or whatever to be able to search and to make sure that you have some other items, maybe even picking up some just important items that you don't want to lose in a flood situation. Because guys, with that water coming down, those people would have lost everything. One other instance, we just had these fires in this area, and up in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, a lot of people had no idea. They were up on a mountain, there was a one road access out, and they didn't get the evacuation notice, and a lot of people barely got out of those areas, and many didn't. Many people died just not knowing, getting trapped, and not being able to get out. Communication, having your bag ready and be prepared, having your truck with and car. I keep saying truck because I have a truck. Keeping your truck or car with enough fuel in it to get where you're going. Those things are super important in this kind of situation. And guys, it could happen at any time. So just be prepared for those things. It doesn't take a whole lot to do it. Be strong. Be of good courage. God bless America. Long live the Republic. Now, one of the big issues. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the Oroville Dam, and don't forget, you got to improvise to survive.
Now, whether you're from South Carolina or you're from New York, you got to prepare, whether urban or rural. You know what I'm saying? So get with it.